Hello, everybody. Are we ready to go? Jonathan, all good? Streaming? Can I just say welcome to everybody to this session. This session is on the holiday activity and food camps. I'll give a quick introduction to myself and my organisation, to my esteemed colleagues, and then we'll go into the session. So my name is Jeff Parsons. I run an organisation that delivers programmes across the UK. I'm a major deliverer of something many of you will know, National Citizen Service, delivered holiday activity and food camps. I have teams of people going to schools every day, delivering programmes as broad as STEM, personal skills, a whole range of different activities at the coalface with young people. We worked extensively with some very good colleagues in Wiltshire Council this summer on the holiday activity and food camps, which is our link into that particular programme. And today we'll just work around a review discussion around them, the benefits. I will briefly introduce our panel. I will give a quick introduction to the holiday activity and food camps programme, leave each panellist then to say a few words, and then open to all of you to discuss. So on my furthest right, Lee Middleton, Chief Exec of the National Youth Association, and a long-term colleague in the youth sector, a youth worker at heart, and absolutely done a terrific job for brought her supporters en masse with her. Thank you very much from the back there. Anne Longfield, again, long-term colleague, the ex-Children's Commissioner, and now working extensively, still in the sector, and still very passionate about a whole range of issues around there. And David Simmons, MP, again, a long-term supporter of the youth sector for many, many years in his time at the LGA, and now as an MP. So briefly, for those of you that might not have too much awareness of the Holiday Activity and Food Programme, started in a small scale, targeted in 2018. Many of us probably in the public eye would feel like the mainstreaming of it in 2020 was around the Marcus Rashford campaign and what happened with him. But also COVID obviously led to it going countrywide and a 6-week programme delivered at Easter, summer 21, and a week still to go of the 21-22 programme at Christmas, delivered to benefit-related free school meals across the country. 220 million into the programme. Probably those of us that were in the supply chain, it was quite a challenge for all of us to get ready to deliver it. The supply chain probably wasn't fully geared up and ready to deliver what was expected, but I think across the country in a whole variety of different ways, the programme was successfully delivered, but in lots of different ways across the country. Surprisingly, most of the research for the learning gap, the summer learning gap, and also the hunger gap in summer has been done in the USA, probably because their holiday in the summer is 13 weeks. And the evidence that's come out of the USA is a very, very significant deficit, both in learning, in terms of hunger, from that long gap of 13 weeks. There's much less work done in the UK, and hopefully the Holiday Activities and Food Programme now in the UK will provide the research and the evidence necessary to support what I think most people anecdotally believe to be true, which is young people, particularly those in need, suffer more during the holiday period. I would suggest that the camps had more benefit than just feeding young people. From the delivery side, we know parents that received some relief for themselves to spend time with other members of their family, perhaps, to be able to do something, an activity to learn and upskill. So it's not just about the direct benefits. I think all of us that were working at the coalface saw some significant benefits which reached further than just the young people we were all working with. So without further ado, I'm going to go to David to give a brief word and a view on the holiday activity and food camps.
Well, thank you very much indeed for the introduction, Jeff. We always find at these Youth Zone events that we have both the tallest man at the Conservative Party conference and the shortest man at the Conservative Party conference on the panel. So I have a very quick demonstration, but like I say, his history as an Olympic athlete is a very distinguished one. So looking at the topic that we're here to cover today, it is part of the wider debate about child poverty in the UK. And it is a policy issue which governments of all parties have seen as a high priority. And the challenge has always been to identify what specifically we do to alleviate that poverty and to resolve those issues in those children's lives. And for those like me who've been around in local government for a long time will remember the years of a Labour government with an anti-poverty strategy that was based around benefit levels and 60% of household median income. And the big challenge with that, as we saw, the period when that was notionally a success was after the 2008 financial crash, when national household incomes fell slightly for the first time, and a cohort of households with children found themselves going above that 60% median income target with no material change in their actual circumstances. And what that demonstrated was that this is not simply about statistical measures, that the alleviation of poverty needs to be about material change in a child's life that makes a positive difference to their opportunities and to their prospects. And as we then went into the debate about the holiday activity and food programme that followed the impact of the pandemic, it was very clear that for those who were directly involved in this, and we had a number of members of Parliament who'd been teachers, who'd grown up themselves on free school meals, who had experience in communities that had suffered extreme poverty and deprivation, that we needed a much more nuanced solution than simply, as was being proposed by some, extending the free school meals provision to a larger period of time. And I think, again, we'll recognise, most of us, why that is. If we look at, for example, the early years, there are many families who would be eligible for free school meals for their child, but if your child isn't in a setting or isn't in a setting regularly, then those become different to access. There are many households that are impacted by being on a no recourse to public funds condition because they're asylum seekers, where they may not be able to access free school meals. As the Children's Commissioner has pointed out in the past research, there are significant numbers of children who are outside of the formal school system, for whom accessing free school meals may be difficult or impossible. So it's very clear that as a strategy, that was not going to work, particularly at reaching the most vulnerable children in the most chaotic households and families, because it isn't the price of the food that is the problem, it's that much wider context of what's going on in that household that we need to address. And that's where the holidays, activities and food programme, that as Jeff was describing, came into being as a pilot in 2018, something which government was looking at as a means of tackling that long-term poverty and disadvantage, was much, much more effective. Learning from this, so certainly as a member of Parliament with an interest in it, it's very clear that we need to see a mixed economy of provision. We have local authorities and what you might broadly term the statutory sector, and within that the role of schools is absolutely crucial. But also organisations from churches to charities to food banks to community organisations, all of those will play a significant part, not least because they will often be much more aware of what is going on within those families and able to reach out. And in a constituency like mine, which is very prosperous, has much higher levels of household income and affluence than in most, often that disadvantage can be even more compounded because there is not that wider infrastructure in the local area in the way that is the case in other parts of the country. Turning to what we do next, there's clearly a lot of interest in what the government strategy around child poverty and improving aspiration and attainment should be. And within the confines of schools, that's pretty clear. There's a strategy around national curriculum and attainment and testing that is about making sure that children make good educational progress. A big concern for me is how we extend that into the broader context of public health and social attainment. And we need to make sure that there is a clear strategy based upon how do we as a society ensure that every child gets the kind of opportunities that we already know a good and supportive family household will make sure you have. And those opportunities will be things like the ability to participate in volunteering. Some of the organisations represented here at the Youth Zone are good examples of that. But things like work experience. You know, for so many middle-class families, that's just something which they can organise easily amongst themselves. And we know from the research that the earlier you do your work experience, the more likely you are to get and keep a job when you enter the labour market. The opportunity to engage in intergenerational engagement. The UK has teenagers who spend the least time with their grandparents' generation by comparison with any other equivalent country. So we need a system for addressing those things in order to manage the longer-term social impact of what poverty means. Because it isn't just about money, important as that is, it's also about the poverty of opportunity and levelling up, if I dare use that word. So, final point I would finish on, and this has been, I think, a big feature of this debate, and that is around the public perception of what child poverty is about and the reality of what it is about. And often, you know, we see, and I think this happens sometimes quite a lot in politics, and we did with the free school meals extension proposal, a something must be done approach. We must do something about this, and this is something, therefore we must do this. And actually, we had lots of members of Parliament, people who'd been teachers, people who'd been through that experience themselves, who said, including on the benches of the other political parties, we know that whilst this might be a useful measure, it will not fundamentally address the need in the lives of the children who are the most deprived, who face the greatest difficulties. We need a much more proactive and structured solution to engage with those families to turn that situation around. And local authorities, Abby, I'm sure we'll touch on this, with the experience of the so-called Troubled Families programme, that's not just about how do we put a little bit of extra money in someone's pay packet, but what do we need to do to go round to that family's house to recognise that there may be problems of addiction, there may be problems of domestic violence, there may be problems of alcohol and drugs. How do we get those children out from behind that door and to school and ready to learn? And how do we keep them doing that? And how do we get those mums and dads to the job centre and making applications for work and getting treatment for any problems that they may face in their lives? How do we turn that situation around? That is something which the free school meals policy does not even scratch the surface of. But it is something which local authorities and skilled youth workers in particular are absolutely critical to. So for me, it seems clear that the future of that strategy is in recognising the complexity and difficulty of this issue and ensuring that those who really know how to fix it, who've proven over many years that they can fix it, are at the heart of that solution.
Thank you very much, David. I'm going to hand over next to Anne.
Thank you. Ooh. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and really pleased to come after David, who I agree with virtually everything you said there. You know, you've been so committed to these issues and worked so hard on it for so long, and now on the Education Select Committee, which is a really good committee, I think, at the moment. The first thing to say is that I've, you know, campaigned, wanted to have, whatever you want to call it, positive activities for kids to do outside the formal classroom for decades. So for me, this is a kind of no-brainer. It's pretty obvious that children spend, I think, about a fifth of their time in the formal classroom, and there's lots more goes on in terms of their social development, social need outside of that. And at the same time, there isn't always the opportunities for all kids to be able to engage with that. You know, it is interesting looking at the kind of ebbs and flows of when some of this has been more prevalent than others. Yes, estates have a big history of providing holiday camps, bases, play schemes, whatever you want to call them. So do lots of councils over decades. You know, when I was, setting out and greening this area, it was actually lots of councils that were running play schemes, but also schools too. And I know a lot of schools still run activities during their holiday period and after school. But often all of these are kind of quite short term, you know, maybe a week here or a few hours here. And I think what the opportunity here is to extend this to the stage where actually it can tick so many boxes. It can offer kind of social skills, actually skill development for the children, young people themselves. And it can also offer that support that parents need to be able to get out to work on a regular basis. Because as David said, this is a complex matter. I don't think that holiday activities and food, important though that is in any way the whole picture. That's not going to solve the issue of families and children in poverty, but it is a really welcome introduction. I know from lots of councils and schools and others that ran them, often at quite short notice this summer around the country. People are really proud of, you know, what happened, what went on, and think that there was some really jobs well done there. So yeah, I think that's a really important point to kind of reflect on and say that works. So where do we go next, and what can we do more? In terms of poverty, when we're looking at food poverty, you know, everyone tells me that there's been a real spike in people who've been identified as needing help in referrals and the like. And that intervention is very much about alleviating that symptom at that point. But we do need to get at what the causes are and really offer that help and that springboard. And for me, that's always been in 3 areas. Getting parents into good jobs that can pay. You know, a lot of parents are doing 2, 3 jobs that don't have the security about them and still don't add up for them. There is an issue about the safety net and how that needs to, again, look at the areas which creates cliff edges for families where they find themselves in very difficult circumstances. And then there's the part where you're really working with kids who are growing up in households with not enough money and really helping them to be able to flourish on their own there and really improve their own outcomes. So I do think now is the time, with clearly big spotlight on levelling up from all angles, that the whole of the child poverty strategy is really revitalised, and that actually different departments can play their role in here. So we know that during the summer, you told me yourself, actually, there was a lot of demand there. A lot of youth workers have told me that it's actually not only the severity of incidents, be that about poverty or other, has increased, but also the frequency over COVID. There's no doubt that COVID has heightened the vulnerability of a lot of children. And, you know, I can recite all of those, but we know that disruption, the increase in mental health difficulties, domestic violence and the like. And that all then has an impact on the resilience of families, because, you know, that's clearly what we're talking about here. What was very clear to see during the pandemic was that different families had different levels of assets to draw on. And for those that had, you know, much more secure assets, of course, it was a massively different picture than others. In terms of food banks, and we have our colleague here from the Trussell Trust there. I think I was asking the latest figure on how many food banks are in schools, and the last figure that I saw was one in 5 schools now have a food bank. And I was really shocked when I first saw a big food bank in a school. And my fear is that we're becoming to see that as quite normal. I don't think we should accept that is the norm. Yes, of course. I want to encourage everyone to put stuff in those baskets wherever they exist, but let's aim for higher than that. Let's move on from accepting that's the way we want things to be. So what do we want in the future? Well, I would really love us to look at these holiday schemes as a successful pilot. Holiday activities on their own half, I would love to see more local authorities and schools working together. I think there's good partnerships there that have formed during the pandemic or gelled further during the pandemic that could be built upon. And I'd love that to be stitched into a wider employment support program about offering childcare for older children, but also to talk to the police and what that means in terms of offering that security and safe place to go for children and young people themselves. I think that partnership has huge amounts to bring, and the resources in schools is one that I'm keen to get my hands on there. But what I would love to see is actually play schemes of this kind become part of life for families, something they can plan towards throughout the year, and something that children themselves can look forward to, but also expect to be part of their year, but also hopefully their school life as well. They're quite targeted at the moment, and of course they're targeted because they're designed for a particular reason at the moment, but I'd like to look at opening that up in terms of a much more universal offer, subsidised, free for those who need it, but also I think there's many families who would be able to contribute and be able to pay for that. It's not as complicated to do that as it might seem. So as terms of poverty reduction, I think this is an important part to alleviate poverty. It's got much wider benefits, but I think then the next question is, how do we plumb this in as a mainstream way of doing things, but also really start to tackle that poverty reduction that we know so families need to see.
Thank you very much, Anne. Abby, you will have had responsibility for delivering it this summer. So to coin a phrase, how was it for you?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So I'm Councillor Abby Brown. I'm the leader of Stoke-on-Trent City Council. And we are a city that's been undergoing a bit of a quiet revolution, I think, in this sort of area over the last few years. Both in terms of politically, we are a Conservative majority-led administration, which a few years ago would have been completely unheard of for a place like Stoke-on-Trent, but actually socially. So when I became leader in May of 2019, the biggest challenge that I inherited was the fact that we had several of our services that support children in intervention, including our children's social care and also our post-16 education. So my number one priority as leader is to improve outcomes for my children and young people. And I do that along with my brilliant cabinet members pretty much every week, involved in some way or other in terms of how we do that. The city already had a kind of a history around this. One of our previous Labour MPs was very involved with holiday hunger, and I think that is in a way part of what we saw as also a social revolution going on in the city, in that we have lots of really great providers. We also are an opportunity area, but I think what had come out of kind of this raised awareness was actually a creation of a fantastic organisation, who I should talk about in a minute, who delivered our holiday activity and food programme for us called The Hub. And I think it's clearly not unique. I know other places will benefit from similar organisations, but there is coming together really in a way of all elements of society within it. Civic society, football is massive in a city like Stoke-on-Trent, where we have 2 football clubs, but also business involvement too. And the Hub Foundation really was formed on that basis of how they could, in a way, correlate with that need to improve outcomes for our children and young people, albeit at the time not necessarily knowing, I suspect, that that was what they were doing. So for us, the delivery of the HAF programme became something quite different. As Anne said, it's targeted actually at supporting children who receive free school meals, but the Hub Foundation had actually been working on a wider remit than that. So for us, the HAF programme actually is unique in that it does not target just children who receive free school meals. Within Stoke-on-Trent, it benefits those children whose schools identify as potentially needing support, those who are open to safeguarding. In a city where I have over 1,000 children in care today, we clearly have a number of children who are having intervention from us as a service, as well as those with free school meals. And as David mentioned, we are also an asylum, or have been an asylum dispersal centre. So I have a number of children who are asylum seeking too. So for us, the HAF had to be wider than just those children who received free school meals. But we were able to work with an organisation who actually was very much able to do that in terms of working in those fields already and bringing in really the kind of things that, that we want to see without necessarily that view of what we were being told to do. So they set 6 clear objectives in terms of what we wanted to do: eat more healthily, be more active, take part in engaging in enriching activities, be safe and not socially isolated, have a greater knowledge of health and nutrition, and be more engaged with schools and other local services. I know that we've got one of actually the best schemes in the country. We delivered over 38,000 free opportunities, and we actually delivered the majority of those through schools, with a smaller number in our community settings. What that meant we were able to do was actually target those children within schools themselves, but also offer wider activities for families. So we delivered a programme that actually engaged with families as well as just the young people themselves, because we recognise that there's a really big need there. But because the Hub Foundation, as our commissioned organisation to do it, are so well engaged, they were able to bring in a number of other providers, which gave us a really different opportunity to do that. But also a number of business organisations. We're really lucky in Stoke-on-Trent to have fantastic support from JCB, who provided a number of hot meals every day for actually the best part of the last 18 months anyway. into our city, along with other organisations that were able to provide activities. Stoke-on-Trent is the world capital of ceramics. Unsurprisingly, we had a number of organisations who were able to come and provide activities with clay. Also, other things going on. Again, football had to feature in there somewhere, but other organisations too, and it meant that really we were able to pull together a fantastic programme that was supported by a huge number of different providers. We supported over 4,000 children altogether across the period. We know that attendance picked up as we got further into the holidays, as awareness raised, and we worked really hard as a local authority to promote this. We didn't just commission it. That's not my style of leadership. I'm a roll my sleeves up, get stuck in leader. So for us, although we commissioned somebody else, it was really important to me and really important to my cabinet members that our organisations out there delivering it knew that we were right next to them, doing it every step of the way. 68% of participants were actually eligible for free school meals, but because we had this unique split, it meant that we were able to benefit all sorts of different people. And all the activities included at least an hour of exercise for every child with that whole family approach. I think some really interesting comments from previous speakers. David made the really important comment about the need to broaden linkages. As a local authority, we're actually delivering the Kickstart programme, but we're also really keen to work out how we can link that in. So children who come along who perhaps parents are lacking some basic qualifications, how we can engage better through the services we provide to ensure that you've got that kind of two birds with one stone effect, children being looked after, but an opportunity therefore to improve skills of mum and dad. But also other things too, that the hub within themselves, perhaps because the type of organisation they are, mean that they're able to lobby at the very highest levels. The Chief Operating Officer for the hub is a former football player. He's multi-skilled, and we're able to get into lots of different places as a result of their approach. And we're also, I think, looking to see how we can work and engage with other opportunities, and not just because he stood at the back, but my fantastic Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, Ben Adams, leads an organisation called Space that also offers activities for older children, and anyone from Stoke-on-Trent will remember that going back years. And I think there's a great deal of opportunities to link in the type of HAF programme we're delivering with other schemes that are maybe pitched at slightly different cohorts of children, but broadly doing the same thing. Finally, I think one of the things that we will take away and we'll be taking forward as a City Council is the massive importance of continuing actually the HAF programme. Has already been referenced, COVID has had a huge impact on our children and young people. It has without doubt impacted the number of children within Stoke-on-Trent, and I'm sure other places who are able to be engaged. And one of our concerns along with the Hub Foundation is that actually the numbers of children who potentially would have gone along and got involved will be less than those who did because of COVID, because mum and dad are scared, because there are all sorts of other issues at play. But we think it's really important to stress that actually this is needed more than ever, so we'll be continuing to lobby for that. We've also just commissioned a report that we will be using to build on what we already know to continue to lobby. This is really important, and I think it's really important as a Conservative council leader to be seen to be lobbying on this to my own government. It's important to me, it's important to my city, it's important to us as a government as well, and I'm really happy to be making that case in terms of what a difference it is making. And it is making a difference. We have a prospectus in Stoke-on-Trent that we launched earlier this year, and it has 4 pillars within it, and the benefits and the deliverables from the HAF programme impact directly on that for me as a leader. One of those is improving education and skills for my children and young people, but also for families too, but also increasing health and productivity. So for me, continuing to support the HAF programme is hugely important, and I will be continuing to lobby on the basis of that along with partners within the city, because I think it really does make a massive difference every day to children in Stoke-on-Trent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abby. I think that's something all of the people throughout the country that worked on the programme, I think one of the biggest things we all absolutely saw the difference it made at the coalface. I think it really came home to everybody. Lee, over to you.
Thank you very much. I want to give us a slightly different view of this, and I've been a youth worker for 25 years. I've run a youth service, one of the largest county council youth services, Tory-led authority as well. And it always struck me that 10, 15 years ago, maybe 10% of the budget for the activities went on food. And it might traditionally be a tuck shop or those kinds of activities. But more and more and more, budgets were being moved into providing basic food. Young people turning up at youth centres hungry. And when I left that job to come and do this role, 90% of our activity budget was going on feeding young people. And these are kids who are, this is well, it's Surrey, so it's a leafy place. The world assumes that it's a very well-off area. But however, 90% of our spend was going on feeding hungry kids who are coming into youth club in the evenings 3 nights a week and needing food. And there's a problem in society when we've got that issue. When children are not being fed and given the support, or their parents aren't able to do that, there are more fundamental questions that we need to ask ourselves around how we protect and support those young people and their families and enable their parents to be able to do that, and communities around them. I'm also struck over that last 10 years, the reduction in what we might call early help services has gone off a cliff, as we've pulled all money into acute social care or other forms of support. And we've lost the plot when it comes to providing that early help, community-based prevention that is there to support families, support young people in the community. And so, food and food poverty and hunger are factors within that narrative. And I think that's something that we need to seriously consider as a nation about how we address that and we support that. But one of my biggest takeaways from, I've been talking to youth workers about the, they call it the HAF fund, the school, it's very short term. It arrives, you fund, it delivers a period of time, and then things stop. And so, and one of my biggest challenges and conversation we had with number 10 was, collectively across all government departments, there's probably something like £2.5 billion spent on non-school support for children, young people and families. But none of it's joined up. You've got HAF money, you've got Youth Investment Fund, you've got all sorts of other pots. And if you could collect that resource together, come with a collective strategy about what are the things we want to make a difference on, how do we want to fund that community-based frontline activities and support for young people, we'd be so much more impactful in the way we do things. And my challenge to government is, I often hear that ministers are quite willing to do this, but actually the systems within departments of giving up budgets is what holds some of this collaboration back. I know the DCMS is talking to the Department for Education about their cross-thinking, but can they get the budgets to tally and the activity to tally? It seems impossible. It seems so difficult. And I hope that with reshuffle and new ministers, there's an opportunity there to really get into the detail and to change that narrative. Because if those departments could come together, can join up the dots, can work with local authorities, and not, there's often this gap between central government and local government, and worse, it's a complete distrust of local government. At best, it's, we're not sure how they think, work, and act. And I've been in both parts of the system, so I kind of got a reflection of some of that. Then actually a collaboration between government departments pooling budgets with local authority resources, local authority knowledge, expertise and teams collectively would make a much bigger difference on issues like food poverty, on things like serious youth violence and other factors that are affecting young people. And all these things are linked. All these things are interlinked. So I guess my plea, and I guess one of the things that we did, and some work that we did with Anne when she was Children's Commissioner at the beginning of the pandemic, was to look at the scale of the challenge. And pre-pandemic, about 1 million young people would have accessed youth services, community-based activities, or needed to. Let's put it that way. Often they don't exist, but needed to. As a result of just the end of the second lockdown, that number had tripled. And if you factor in the education catch-up challenge, young people 7 years to catch up their education, the impact that's going to have on future incomes, there's a massive challenge for us as a nation that we've got to lean into. We've got to take much more seriously than we currently are. And if it's 3 million young people who need support, then we've got to triple our ambition, and that's my overall challenge. And I guess the last thought is, we've not mentioned universal credit yet, but there's a massive cut coming to universal families very shortly that's going to make a difference, and is going to really hit the ability of families to feed their children and themselves, and what are we doing about it? And because I think it was a brilliant thing that was stepped up as part of the pandemic response, but this pandemic is not over. We're a guidance authority for the pandemic. We've been advising the youth sector. We're ready to carry on for the next 2 years in some of the activities and support the youth sector is going to need to respond to this stuff. And schools are thinking 7+ years. So this resource is absolutely critical, and it's only going to set us further back potentially. And I urge some additional thinking on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The one thing that resonates intensely there is about lining up the youth sector and getting a strong single message. David very kindly mentioned one of my previous careers as an Olympic athlete, and we didn't get that right in sport till 1997, and the creation of UK sport And then we got the message right, we lined everybody up, we got funding, and we have a bit of a gold train running at the moment at the Olympic level, at the elite level in sport, and we're working hard now at the next tier down at participation. But that lining all the voices up to really get a strong message to government is so crucial. So thank you very much to all our panelists. It's over to you for the rest of the session to carry on. Take questions from the floor. Yes, gentleman at the back there.
Is it on? Yes, it is. Yeah, Jim Murray. I'm PPC for many occasions. For Bootle, Liverpool, Bootle is one of the most, in fact, recognised as the most deprived constituency in the country. Some 15 years ago, it's and I'm the eldest of 6 kids. I'm one of those deprived children. I'm one of those children who were on free school meals from 5 to 18. These are my people. I've been a welfare rights officer, been a social worker. Hey, listen, I know what I'm talking about. I want to ask 2 questions to the panel. Do they agree that the average parent, well, not the average parent, just about every parent, mothers and just about all fathers as well, want the best for their children, but many of them don't have the skill sets, they don't have the background, they don't have the generations of middle class emphasis on education, on engagement, and etc. Hence, Professor Donna Susskind, you'll know about the 30 million words project in America. You'll know that kids, my kind of kids, possibly me, when we started school, we were something like 18 months behind our middle class people. That's the first question. Do they agree that the parents do want the best for the kids? Second question is, does the panel agree that therefore parenting skills should be taught to them? Not when they're parents. I'm talking about parenting skills right from when they are in primary school. I'm talking about 12 years of being taught how to be a parent, what's important about the parent, criticize the behavior, not the child, nutrition, etc., not kickstart, far too late. Actually get it into the DNA when the children are young. Those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
Who wants to tackle that first? I'm looking across the panel. Who wants to answer? Anne?
So, in answer to your well, I agree with both your questions. I do think that all parents want the best for their kids. I think the ability to be able to deliver on that is a big hill to climb for a lot of parents. And it's not just one issue. A lot of people said to me when there was the whole debate about, food and hunger and free school meals, how can it get to a point where someone can't afford like 6 eggs or, a loaf of bread? And of course, it's not that easy. Things compound. People get into debt. Then there's, getting out of debt is really difficult. And, that's without looking at all the additional things that are much more likely if you haven't got enough money. The likelihood of mental health difficulties and likely with poor health. So, yes, I do think that all parents want the best for their kids. And in parenting skills, I thought your point, David, about the family support program is one to come back to, because actually that's something that local authorities have been delivering themselves. If you could combine, I would say an enhanced extended family support program, because I think it works well, and more of that I think would do great things. But also, with much more of an emphasis on really looking at how early you can get to parents to help them. So, you've got Andrea Ledsam's program about healthy child start and really looking at conception for the first 1,001 days. I think we should have that. I think, having support, parenting skills in schools, that's something that Frank Field, a fellow Northwesterner there, advocated some time ago, and I think that's very sensible. But also, I would have parenting skills in as part of the antenatal classes, any chance you have to reaffirm that. But I'd also think that family support program, whatever form that takes, needs to then slot in, because parents often need people on their side to be able to help them navigate the challenges they've got coming down their way.
And in its own way, the HAF program tried that this time round with parents. COVID made it very difficult, but the program was aimed and targeted to engage with parents in terms of upskilling them in terms of food, nutrition, health. So definitely came into the program. Another question? Yes.
Thank you, panel, for a really interesting conversation. My name's Mari Burton. I'm from the National Education Union. This is a question primarily to David, because you brought it up, but obviously open to the rest of the panel as well. I entirely agree about the importance of skilled youth workers as a way of supporting children in poverty and their families in poverty. But we know that over the last 10 years, spending on youth services in England and Wales has faced about a 70% real terms cut. And some YMCA research called Out of Service has just found that we've lost, over the last decade, about 750 youth centres, about, well, more than 4,500 youth workers. So how do we square that circle then? If we've hemorrhaged on those skilled youth workers, we know that they're really important in terms of supporting those families, and yet over the last decade we've seen this loss. So how do we then move to a situation where we've got those skilled people who can build back better with all those services around school, to use a phrase?
Thank you. I think for a start, and it also goes back to the previous question, the nature of raising children effectively in this country is as much a cultural thing as it is a policy thing. So we can have all sorts of interventions that we seek to do with families, but what we need to do is get the culture right. And I think the aim to have a provision that is beyond school, that supports young people as they grow and develop, is a key part of having the right culture for young people to grow up in. And it's a question whether learning to be a parent is something you are taught at school, or whether it is something that you gain from your community, your extended family, and how you develop those skills. I think that is an open question. So does it mean that we need to go back to a strategy that simply says we need to employ lots more youth workers, we need to have lots more youth centres, and that will solve the problem? Now, I know back in the days when we had significantly more generous funding, we still had all the challenges that we're talking about today. So these challenges are not ones that have just popped up in the days of the pandemic, or indeed in the last decade or so. The food bank that serves my prosperous and affluent constituency opened in 2009 at the absolute height of the generosity of government benefits and the focus of government policy at alleviating child poverty. And still today, when we have the third cheapest food in the world, only behind the US and Singapore with the food affordability compared to household income, we still have a significant challenge of children and young people not getting the food that they need. I think all those things demonstrate that there isn't going to be a simple, well, if we just go back to doing it this way, then it will all be fine. Now, I think Lee's challenge is a really good one. What's the strategy across government? It seems to me a deficiency at the moment is we don't have, in my view, a clear strategy beyond what happens in the classroom for what happens with young people. And I'd say there's a little bit of watch this space about it. My view is, from a governmental perspective, what we need to do is identify the things, the opportunities that we would want each child to have that help to raise aspiration and create opportunity. Many of those things will be delivered through youth work, but not all of them. Some of them are things that happen in families, some of the things that happen as a result of direct interventions of the state in other ways. But we need to have that shopping list, if you like, of things that we expect every young person to achieve and to enjoy. And we need to make sure that resources like the budget that currently sits with DCMS is focused on making sure every child has that opportunity. So I think that is where the next steps will come in bringing a cross-governmental focus on what it is we want each child to achieve. Not just what does the service look like that we want to provide, but what is the difference we want to make in the child's life.
Thank you. Lee.
Yeah, I mean, National Body for Youth Work can't not respond to your question, really. I mean, I think there are lessons to learn from the past. There were brilliant youth services, and there were some not so brilliant youth services, and we've got to learn. And I think the last decade has allowed us to reflect on that. But it's a systems approach, there needs to be schools with care services, voluntary sector, and youth services all working together. I guess my challenge is that if you picture that as a stool, one of the legs is missing at the moment. We've cut youth services so hard and so fast that the stool falls over because you're a leg missing. And unless we put that leg back on, and it'll be a modern leg, it'll be crafted differently, it'll look shiny, and it'll have different skills, different approaches, different methodologies, but it'll work in a different blended way alongside other professions, other responses. But unless you put that leg back on, the system is always going to be somewhat broken. And you're always going to have a wobbly stool, or you're going to fall off every time you sit down. And so, that's our challenge, is to put the right services back at the right level. And the work that we've done is that's a £1.2 billion spend need, which is a big ask of government. But that's my request to the Chancellor. That's what we need. And I know the Treasury have looked at our figures in great detail. I know they've taken it quite seriously. Is that going to translate in the spending review into 1.2 billion? I don't believe so. But, we can only hope, and we can only keep pressing for that. But what young people deserve is a trusted adult in the community that supports them, that champions them, that is there for them. And that is the difference between other professions in the system. Young people, it's a voluntary relationship. Young people choose to engage with a youth worker. I have no choice to go to school. I have no choice to talk to a police officer. But I get the choice to come to youth clubs or what have you. And that's why youth services are so effective at engaging the most disadvantaged, the most disconnected young people. And that's why that leg needs to be put back on.
I'm greatly looking forward to seeing Lee's shiny leg in the future. I'm going to look forward to that experience. Shiny modern leg, yes. No, it's so true. In any other walk of life, in a business walk of life, we talk about the customer journey. And we have that through the progression through school. And as we look across the young person landscape, we haven't got that. There's many component parts out there, but we haven't managed to get that unified strategy and voice together to create that young person customer journey or multiple customer journeys. Any more questions? Yes.
Hiya, thank you so much. My name is Queenie. I'm from an organisation called Reaching Higher, based in London, and also a former beneficiary and ambassador of On-Side Youth Zones. So my question is sort of towards Abby, but also open to the panel and anyone else that is here. There tends to be almost like a hesitancy among some youth organisations in terms of like collaboration, particularly in London or South London, where I'm from, and it almost seems quite competitive, which is understandable given like funding and things like that. So my question is, have you seen any effective collaborations, and is there any learning around that, particularly within local areas, and also just because like from where I'm from, when a youth zone came to our area, a lot of organisations tend to back away from it rather than actually actively seeking collaborations. So I just wanted to get any thoughts on that.
Thank you. I think in a way, the way that we commissioned the HAF through the Hub Foundation brought that together for us. So the Hub Foundation did deliver their own activities before, but what they actually did is then commission out to a number of other organisations, including the YMCA and various others who operate in the city, which meant that in a way there wasn't that competition because there was space for everyone and there was that recognition that everybody has got something to add. But equally, I know at the moment in Stoke-on-Trent we have something that started over the course of the last 12 to 18 months, a youth collective, where one youth organisation took the lead of saying, actually, guys, let's get in a room and let's talk about what our USPs are, what collectively we all deliver, what differences there are, and how we can move forward. Now, at the moment, that is a work in progress in terms of where they're going, but I think that's been quite good. My favourite thing in my ambition with a lot of things that we do as a council is just to be a partner. And the thing with the youth collective is we are just that, we're a partner. And it's really nice to kind of see that conversation going on without, as a council, you having to either tell people that's what they should be doing or equally being expected to lead it. So I've got no secret for how you get there and how you get organisations to do that, but certainly that's something we see as delivering value. But I think equally, if you can find that organisation, as we have in the city, like the Hub, that are prepared to commission and prepared to engage with other organisations, I think equally that can be really powerful and really beneficial too.
I can take one more question.
Thank you. I'm Guy Renner-Thompson. I'm the Cabinet Member for Children's Services in Northumberland. We've seen a nearly 50% increase in child poverty in the North East in the last 5 years. The half is great, but I'd rather live in a country that doesn't actually need to have a half. You know, we'd rather have a wealthier society. To fix our child poverty, I think we need to understand the causes. So does the panel have an idea as to why our child poverty has increased by nearly 50% in the last 5 years? Because it has happened under our watch, and it's not something that I think we want, but we don't want to be in that same position in 5 years' time.
David, sounds like one for you.
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, nice to meet you. Very interesting and perhaps different challenge in Northumberland for what it is in London or Birmingham or wherever you go. And that reflects that one size doesn't fit all. I think there are a couple of big drivers. The cost of housing is a very significant one. The inflexibility of the social housing market, which makes it much harder for low-income households to go to where work is, compared to the situation you find in many other European countries, is a big factor. Our benefit system is relatively not very generous, so our overall benefit level in the UK is quite low by comparison with a lot of comparator countries. And of course, there's been a challenge with insecure work as well. However, with all those negatives, there are positives as well. We know really good level of vacancies in the job market at the moment, and certainly prospect in terms of reform of things like housing that will help to begin to bear down on some of those costs. So I think we have both a reasonably good understanding of what the causes are, but also a sense of positivity about how we'll fix it. But it's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to be about changing those longer-term trends that have brought us to where we are today.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much to all the panel members. Greatly appreciate your attendance today. Greatly appreciate your contribution. We will wait and see what happens with HAF going forward, and see whether the Chancellor's got anything to say today. But thank you very much for attending. Appreciate it. And please give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you.